folks that are here that have not met you and that maybe never even heard of Tom Sawyer other than back in the books with the straw hat?
Well, that's easy to start out with. First of all,
Right.
I'm sorry.
You want to fill them in on?
Okay, we'll do the super capsulized version of what happened to me and why I'm sitting here in front of this camera talking to you today. 11 years ago, I had a truck follow me right here in my driveway, and had the truck jacked up with the front wheels off it. The truck at that time weighed about 2 tons, and the truck fell on me and fell right across my chest, right in this area here, and squeezed all the air out of me and made me unable to breathe for a little over 15 minutes in time. Many things took place in the accident, including me having very profound personalized and private thoughts, such as how degrading this was, that if in fact I die this way, that it wasn't good enough for me. Now, I don't mean that arrogantly. I mean that I was a very good mechanic, and this wasn't fair because it wasn't my fault that the truck fell on me. There were air pockets underneath the asphalt, and the driveway collapsed. So it wasn't my fault, it was asphalt. With that excuse and so on, and with that rationale that I simply had to be where I was and be still, there's a few things that you should know about me at the time. One of which was that 50 pounds ago I was a national caliber athlete. I was in excellent physical shape, very strong. I was very assured of myself and my abilities. I was, as I mentioned, a good mechanic. I had the ability to hold my breath for over 3 minutes in time. I usually did my own work. It's not that I wouldn't allow anybody else to do work for me, but I was usually, very honestly, the most qualified, including working on my truck. So, should also stereotype myself a little bit and tell you that at the time I was an agnostic. I had been brought up a Christian Catholic, and in spite of the so-called learning and making my communion and confirmation, around the age of 13, I decided that that was very bluntly just religious stuff, hocus pocus baloney, and that it really had no bearing on my personal life. In other words, very bluntly, I had no personal relationship with any kind of a God. With the truck falling on me, that changed very instantly and very dramatically. And it wasn't just that I almost died, it was very bluntly that I was able to see God and experience that. And realistically, for the first time in my life. Also, I was pretty much an all-American guy at the time. I was 33 years old and married with 2 children. At that time, my son Todd was 10 years old. He was assisting me working on the truck. And as soon as the truck fell, he ran in and called the paramedics. So some of the scientific information we get about the accident was, for instance, it was called in at 7:41 in the evening, and shortly after 8 o'clock that evening, the paramedics arrived at the driveway and rushed up to assist me in my extrication and my survival. During that time, many things happened, one of which was, as I was going unconscious after a couple of futile, I know it was something like that, futile attempts to ward off the oxygen deprivation and the onset of the unconscious state, you know, where you shake your head no and try real hard. Some intensive thoughts were in my head that it's more important to struggle and hang on and live than it is to just give in and die. And that was at the point where it was physically acceptable or okay to just give in and pass out and have all the pain and suffering and so on like that just go away. And in spite of that, you know, I did care about life. An attitude like that is important in the last few seconds of a traumatic experience or a state of disease, especially if it's terminal. And I felt that way, and I was appreciative of the last few seconds in time to struggle a little further. But I did get to the point of unconsciousness, and as I went unconscious, I had the experience of seeing, and when I say seeing, I don't necessarily mean seeing with my physical eyes. It was seeing At least hypothetically, the experience, it felt exactly the same as seeing. And what I was seeing was blotches or flashes of various colors. They were very beautiful. It was very enjoyable. I don't have any scientific explanation whatsoever for what this was or why I saw it in the way that I did, but I first tried to describe it and said that it was all the colors of the spectrum. And then I learned and realized that that includes infrared and ultraviolet. And I still say that it certainly was that. And that I experienced the extreme visual connotation of various colors. And colors such as opalescences, phosphorescences, fluorescences, that of course I have not been able to duplicate, and it was very enjoyable and nice. Well, with it, no explanation as to either exactly what that was or why I experienced it, even 11 years later, the experience went on to just having a state of unconsciousness. I had a feeling of being completely unconscious, everything blank, and nothing to describe at all, and then rather instantaneously having the experience of waking up from that state. And when I say waking up, I didn't get up because the truck was still on me. I didn't necessarily open my eyes or take a breath. I wasn't able to do that. So what we're really talking about is from a physically unconscious state where the last few heartbeats were experienced and my heart was stopped, and of course all the other organs were slowing down to the point, and this experience of absolutely waking up was just my mind and possibly some brain functioning going on. And the perceptions that I had is what I'm describing to you now. Those perceptions were feeling absolutely awake. Everything was vivid and clear. I had the same sensations as being able to hear accurately, see as well as I've ever seen, and I've always had good vision. You know, even though I'll describe to you paradoxically that there was no, well, I lost my train of thought when a friend just drove by. Yeah, there was a sense of timelessness. I realized that very bluntly there was no such thing as time. And in this timeless state, I had the experience of, for instance, trying to experience where am I, what's going on here, and looking around just as though you would do it physically. It was just, you know, same feeling, same sensations as that. Looking around and thinking, what in the world is this, where am I? And being able to only see absolute darkness. There were no identifiable objects. It was absolutely black, opaque. And with this realization, even though I wasn't frightened by this was still comfortable, the next experience that I can describe to you is having that darkness or blackness just take the shape of a tunnel. Shape of a tunnel is the best description as far as I'm concerned. I've heard other people in the last 11 years say a funnel, a tube, an abyss or abyss, various other descriptions, but I like the idea of a tunnel because it's cylindrical. It extends forward, in my circumstance, to infinity. It was ever so slightly funnel shaped, allowing for the depth perception. With this realization and this sighting of this tunnel, I had the feeling that I was moving forward, and it was straightforward, well balanced, comfortable, and through the center of this tunnel. That forward motion increased in speed, although there was not wind, vibration, sound. There was certainly a visual connotation of the tunnel flashing around me or me going through the center of it, but there were no G-forces like we would normally experience in acceleration. With this acceleration, however, the first empirical piece of knowledge that I gained from this out-of-body experience or near-death experience was that I realized, and I simply realized it, let's say intuitively, I realized that I attained the speed of light or possibly faster than the speed of light. At that time in my life, I didn't understand what that meant. I didn't realize that it was physically impossible. I didn't realize anything at all about Albert Einstein's theories on relativity, and I was not aware of mathematically that it's basically 186,000 miles a second. I knew that it was very, very fast, but more importantly and more accurately, I knew that whoever I was at that time, and I felt as though I was myself, Tom Sawyer and all my character and characteristics, that I was going or functioning at the speed of light. So whisking through this tunnel, the next thing that I'll describe to you is that way off and paradoxically to infinity was this minute little speck of light. That light was very profound. It was the first identifiable object that I was able to perceive or see. So I was eagerly anticipating, what is that, and isn't that beautiful? And with that realization, it was even more profound, because that little speck of light way, way off in the distance was very bluntly the most beautiful thing that I'd ever experienced in my life. It was absolute total beauty. It was white. Sometimes we like to dress up white by saying blue-white, like we try to grade diamonds and such. It was absolutely pure. It was brighter than something that would immediately blind you. It was the brightest thing that I'd ever experienced, brighter than 100,000 carbon arcs or welder's torches, various things of brightness that we could measure. It was at least the equivalent in brilliance of the supernova. It was also, other than beautiful, it represented a type of love that I'd never experienced. Now I can use the phrase unconditional love, although I wasn't familiar with that phrase at the time of this accident. As I got closer to it, it's incorrect for me to say that the light got better, because I'm trying to describe perfection for you. Once you attain perfection, you can't get better than that. You can't have something improve. And in spite of that dilemma, it is paradoxically accurate for me to say that it was more perfect, it was better and better. And in the last several years, a realization has come that if you have something that is perfect and you're observing it or you're experiencing it, it can't get any better. But you and your perceptions can get clearer and more accurate. So as I developed a better sense of what it was I was experiencing, that's where I have the sensation or the realization that things got better or clearer or more accurate. There was some type of a deceleration in this tunnel, because the next thing that I want to describe to you is that I was motionless. I was stopped at the end of the tunnel, and I had a realization, let's just call it intuitive again, that behind me was this tunnel. I did not turn around to verify it, say to turn around and look at it. It wasn't necessary. Much more importantly was before me, and then covering the entire vista before me, just totally engulfing everything, was the light. As I approached the end of that tunnel, I realized that the light itself was emanating from outside the end of the tunnel. It was not the very end of the tunnel. It was engulfing whatever the realm was outside this tunnel. And again, that might just be symbolism. It might just be a focused perception onto the aspect of the light. And once that perception is focused accurately enough to perceive any degree of it, then there's no longer the need for this symbolic tunnel or funneling or focusing. I like those phrases. It's interesting. I've never quite told it that way. I think it shines a little different light on the subject. Before me was the light, and instantaneously, and I want to emphasize instantaneously, the light emanated to me in a telepathic way. And you know, let me first say and get out of the way that, very bluntly, the light is God. The light is the light of Jesus Christ, the light of Buddha enlightened. And of course, if you're offended by this Eastern analogy that this man Buddha that I'm saying is also the light and God, I'm not saying that he, the man Buddha, is God. I'm saying that a man who became Buddha and extremely enlightened has passed on and is now in that light, and therefore God-like. That's what I'm describing. But as I first perceived it, I just perceived that the light emanated to me and made me understand that some most profound things, such as, and I'll role play again to describe the dialogue of sorts that I've kind of translated. For instance, the light emanated to me, Tom, you have to be where you are and in the condition that you are, and before you is the light, which is redundant because I was already experiencing that. You have an opportunity, Tom, to perceive or desire or ask any question, any series of questions, and regardless of what the question is or how intensive the knowledge is necessary to even understand a proper questioning, that as soon as you formulate the desire for such a question, that the absolute, unequivocal, correct answer will be emanated instantly back to you. Now, what I'm describing is a phrase that I've coined, which is very accurate, and it's superluminal telepathic communication, in that it's a telepathic type of rapport, just thought pattern to thought pattern, that functions at or faster than the speed of light. Little loose ends tied together, and this was not just logical deductive reasoning. This is something that I was shown and told as part of the experience. In other words, if you're so inclined to understand anything at all about clairvoyance, it would be a telepathic, clairvoyant type rapport that is extremely pure or functioning at such a speed that is outside the realm of this physical existence and outside time. If you function at the speed of light, you cease to function in what we know as in time. So your perceptions would be at the speed of light, and any kind of dialogue would be not held by the bonds of timelessness or timeliness, and that if you ask something, you can be given the answer simultaneously. I asked many questions, and to capsulize that, just to give you an idea of what would be a question that I would ask. Again, it's incorrect for me to say first question, second question, third question, because you're missing the point of the timelessness and missing the idea behind superluminal telepathic communication. But one of the questions, which in all probability would have been a first, would be, am I okay? And I didn't mean am I alive or dead, because I'd already experienced my heart stopping and realizing that I was at least clinically dead. In that capacity, I was asking, am I okay? In other words, in God's eyes, am I all right? Am I okay? And I can kind of smile and brag and say thumbs up that, for the moment being at least, that everything was all right. And then the most profound questions, in hindsight of this experience, I would kind of damn myself and say, why didn't I ask for a particular cure to a type of cancer, so that now that I'm here and having had this experience, I could share that with a major university and be able to facilitate something that was not selfish or just about me and share it with the rest of the world. Well, the timelessness of that seemed to be more timely than anything else, in that I was limited as to the degree of questions and so on. I wasn't limited to the type of question, but just the degree of my perceptions of what I needed to know before I went on with this experience. And one of those questions was very bluntly, what about the Jesus stuff? And in that capacity, understanding again that I was an agnostic at the time, but at least curious enough to know, like many people question, come on, all kidding aside, what about that Jesus stuff? I mean, is it real or isn't it? And, you know, some people can have very profound faith, and they can fervently believe and follow Christianity and be a good Christian, and still that little bit of doubting Thomas in them saying, you know, some of the fine details perhaps of who was Jesus the Christ, what is the Christ, what is the Christ light, where is it, how is it perceived, am I that, are you that? So very bluntly I asked, what about the Jesus stuff? And of course that's a translated version of the desire to know all that. So it was emanated, for the moment being at least, thumbs up in the affirmative, that it was okay. And that one singular question, that one desire, really the questions were answered, was there this man, Jesus of Nazareth? Did he walk around and have a ministry, so to speak? Was he divine? Is he divine? Where is he now? In other words, what about all the Jesus stuff? And that was answered. I was able to see that, perceive it. Well, that's what I call the question and answer period. Part of that question and answer period was a realization that I had a choice, and the choice for me was that I could desire to return to normal life, and the instant that I had that desire, the instant that I perceived that or wished for that, that it would happen absolutely, and that there would be no strings attached, that as soon as I decided that I would wish to return to normal life, it would happen. The other half of that choice was that I could stay and become part of that light. And you have to understand first where I am and what I'm describing. I'm talking about perfection. I'm talking about the heaven state. I'm talking about God. And even though life is beautiful, we've got flowers around us and all kinds of relationships and learning experiences, what I'm really describing is an opportunity to finalize that and move on to the next stage in our lives, which is what we call after death. And of course, to be in that state of perfection is not much of a choice at all. Many other people I found have a choice given to them, and they feel deep in their heart that they're unfinished business, that they have to come back for a reason, or that they're just not ready to die, or they can't quite handle this much right now, or that there's a selfishness of sorts, meaning that they don't feel it's proper for they to leave their children, or the many excuses why people would desire to return from a clinical death state, or what we call life after death. For me, it was not much of a choice at all. And I do have to interrupt the flow of this description and say that prior to my decision, I had to also have a complete total life review. And you cannot have a decision will not be allowed without the person's perception of their own life, and perceived not only as they have lived it, but perceived with total knowledge, unconditional love, and learning experiences that you have learned subconsciously and superconsciously that you may not be intellectually or psychologically aware of. I had the life review, and I'll describe that in a minute or two, but I want to go on with the choice that I was given. I was given this choice, and only after having a life review, very bluntly, I chose to stay and become part of that light. The problem with that, and trying to sort this out with researchers and trying to describe it to people like yourself, is that there was a string attached to the decision to stay and become part of that light. And that it was emanated to me that if I decided to stay and become part of that light, that at that point, I would cease to function normally. I would no longer be exactly myself, that I would be an actual integral part of the light, or bear with me if I say that I would be light. And that would disallow me forever after to choose on my own decision, with my own characteristics and character, to return to normal life. So in other words, bluntly and simplistically, I could choose to return to normal life and it would happen. If I chose to stay, I would never be able to choose to return again. Well, now that you understand that, I did choose to stay and become part of that light. And as sorry as I feel for myself sometimes, I don't have any explanation as to exactly how, like manipulatively or physically speaking, exactly how I was able to return to normal life, or if there's a rationale or a reason or an excuse. I was never told or shown a single or a multiple excuse or excuses for being here now. I'm pleased that I'm here now. I'm satisfied. I'm probably the happiest person that you will ever meet, generally speaking. I have my ups and downs. I have physical problems. I even have to experience major surgery at times. So all the very realistic parts of living are very much back in my life. And I do honestly at times feel a little selfish and a little sad, in other words, lonely for that state of perfection. I'm very eagerly anticipating my natural death. But this, what we call life, is temporary. And if it be for a job that I haven't finished, if it be that I was not really qualified and got kicked out of heaven, it doesn't really matter too much, the rationale behind it. The important point is that I have returned, and that I've been very, very fortunate, and being able to facilitate many things that I certainly would never have been able to accomplish. And trust me, I'm not being arrogant or egotistical now, but things that really would not have been able to be facilitated if I had not come back. In other words, with that which I was enhanced by, and with that which I was allowed to learn, I'm trying not to take credit for it. In other words, it's not my fault, it's only Ash's fault. In other words, there also a little phrase that I worked my way up through, and if you've ever heard the phrase that there is no justice in nature, there's only nature. In other words, the lion does kill an antelope, and that's part of the food chain, and it's not the poor lion is going to go hungry or the poor antelope is going to be killed. In other words, there's no justice in nature. There's only nature, and it was by God, and as rational as we try to be and justifiable, you should not question God. You should question yourself and your personal relationship with God, but you should not question the workings of nature to that degree, and you should not make those judgment calls that a rabbit should live, but a mouse should not. And in that capacity, there does not have to be an excuse or a rationale for me to be kicked out of heaven or sent back.
In coming back, however that did happen, are there some people and some situations that you were made aware of that you needed to be here to
Yes,
touch?
Carol, even you.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, are you really asking, in others, as soon as I returned, was I aware of?
Well, I don't know if it's that, or as you're living and you come across situations, you have a sense of where your time needs to be spent, or the certain people you need to connect with.
I've experienced a lot of that. I'd never heard of the word synchronicity, as we use it so commonly now. I thought that there were coincidences and things of that nature, and that there was a lot of luck. There was some just victims of circumstances. It was very simplistically thought out, if I thought of it at all. And now I see that there are many, many synchronistic series of events that can both lead you, even manipulate you, but you have also free will, so that, in regarding any given circumstance, you can accept or reject anything.
Do you have free will, Tom?
Yes, I do. Ooh, that was a loaded question, and I answered it, and I was smiling. Yes, I really do. And as much as any human being, I do. I've been given some knowledge, and in other words, my five senses and several other senses have been enhanced. And I still will agree that I have free will over all of that. But with some of that knowledge, there comes a responsibility too. See, I want to tell you that I have responsibilities, but they're not manipulative. In other words, I'm not a victim, and I'm not being led. Although I realize additional responsibilities. Do I have free will, and can I just stop talking, and can I commit suicide? Can I become lustful? Can I become anything that I might desire to be, or allow myself to fall into? Any of these problems, often problems that people experience on a day-to-day basis? Yes, I can do any of that. I can deplete my physical body, as I have done to a large degree. Some manipulative on my part, in other words, on purpose, and other things that I don't have control over, such as the degree of the injury to my back. I didn't have control over that. It's something that, it was an accident, and I have to take the responsibility for that to a degree, but that wasn't my fault either. So if you think in terms of being a victim of circumstances or being manipulated in that way, well, maybe that's so, but I don't feel that way. I feel as though I am in control of myself, because free will is probably the most powerful gift that God has given the human condition. In talked about that in great detail before, and I don't think I can talk about that right this moment. There were individuals that I was aware of, and it got, let me first by kind of saying that I was basically a rather ignorant person regarding subjects as we're talking about now. And it was very strange for me to have a very profound perception of individuals such as Max Planck, Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, and eagerly anticipating meeting them. I didn't know what city they lived in, but I knew them very well. I knew them as though they were a next-door neighbor. And it was shocking and a little sad for me to be told by another physicist that, well, Tom, you talk about them as though you would like to meet them. And I said, well, I would. And then he announced to me that they had died and that they were no longer alive. And of course, through my ignorance, I didn't realize that they were famous physicists around the turn of the century. So that was a little shocking to me. It was strange. But I had that profound awareness as though they were a cousin or a next-door neighbor. That's one aspect. In other words, I was aware of a personal relationship with individuals who had passed on. I became aware of individuals walking around and so on, going to conferences and what have you. I would see someone in a crowded room and just walk over and introduce myself, in other words, socially, politely, but profoundly knowing that I had to say something specifically to that individual. Sometimes it would be only that information, that whoever that person is over there, I must tell them about the Meissner effect or some such subject. And then it's even come to pass, like I just mentioned, the Meissner effect, which is in physics. And I might mention it out loud and then have to go to a book and look it up. It might be very important for me to say something about it, which, let's say spiritually, I might have been aware of, but then in my own personal interest, I would have to look it up to find out what it really meant. So does that mean that I was sent back with bits and pieces of information to help other people? Sure. I mean, okay. I've already accepted that, and it's happened so many times that it's not just a fluke or a coincidence, or I'm not playing a super head game, or even a psychic head game, which is possible. You can be psychic to a degree and know enough to play what I'll call head games or mind games, just for the purposes of sensationalism and even to make a profit or excuses and rationales like that. And I haven't really fallen into that. I'll call it a trap for me. In other words, that would be a trap for me. I would not wish to do that. And in 11 years, I haven't done that. Should I just briefly say, because we're talking about the experience, summarize that I had a complete life review. I was given additional information. I blended into that light. And in the very last stage that I can possibly remember with any accuracy, it was a return trip through the tunnel. Again, with no excuses or rationale, but and I slammed back into my body. At the same time, the truck was lifted off me, and I was revived.
Okay, Tom, going back to your reference to God's unconditional love, how does that relate to sin?
To sin? To sin. Yes, I tried that once. Yeah. Well, I don't know. If somebody else would have asked me that question, if that'd be a question, if somebody else would have asked me that, I would have probably, like one-on-one, I would have asked them, what is your definition of sin? And work off of that. I think the difference between ourselves and as we, and I'm kind of stereotyping or generalizing everybody, that we have a perception of sin, and of course it's self-imposed, even if it be a cultural conditioning. In other words, you're taught that's good, that's bad, and that's so bad that it's a sin. as opposed to something that's not quite as bad is not really a sin, it's just a little bit bad. Further than that, you do have natural instincts, such as if you do something to hurt someone's feelings, you will intuitively know, even ahead of time, that this will probably hurt someone's feelings. Or if you do act it out or say it or do it, you will then experience that this hurt a person's feelings. And then you have immediately two choices. You can block it, psychologically shun it, and justify it, and do all those things and justify that, no, you didn't sin or you didn't do a bad thing, that it was either justifiably bad or that it was just plain bad, but so what? Or totally block it. That may or may not be a sin at that point in time. I think the biggest problem with sin is that I'm talking me for me, and therefore generalizing about everybody, is that the things, the sins of omission and commission that we perform or that we are responsible for in a lifetime are vastly unperceived. In other words, the numbers of inadequacies, the numbers of perpetuated things, in other words, to perform or to do something that is sinful or negative or bad, is that we don't even perceive them on a conscious level.
I guess what I'm trying to relate to is that most of us were brought up to feel that when you pass over, there'd be this scale that this big bad
judgment.
person
Yeah.
getting into judgment,
Yeah,
right?
the judgment, sure.
That this is what you did good and this is what you did bad, and based on all of that, you would either go to heaven or go to hell. And in terms of what you experienced with God's unconditional love,
I think that as opposed to having a transitional state that would include an aspect of purgatory or a hellish experience or a time frame, if you will, that you don't go right from this life, the express lane, right into the light or into the heaven state, that can be perceived with some degree of accuracy as a cause and effect relationship from ill-gotten gains or negative deeds, things of that nature. But generally, I was rather shocked, if you will. I mean, one of the most profound things I learned is that there was no such thing as hell. That the things that I had been taught and shown were terrible deeds, and that don't you dare say or do this, or don't you dare think this way, or act this way, is that that was not, in fact, a sin, and it wasn't perceived as that. Plus, the fact that God, certainly the God that I experienced, is an all-loving God, and that even though there are a very few rare circumstances where in a transitional state or after death, I'll say it that way, after death, there can be a reparation or a further learning experience. It's not from condemnation. It would be more perceived as just a magnificent, loving gesture on the part of God to give you not really a second chance, but to give you the opportunity for a learning experience to overcome our human inadequacies, be they psychological, spiritual, or any other way, physical, all of those things.